Hello and welcome to the Naru FastCast with your hosts, Dave and Josh Masson.
Pull up a chair and listen to us discussing fasting and health-related topics. So I heard you had a pretty eventful sports day today.
Yeah, mate. I dragged my 6-year-old over the finish line. I don't know if I actually won or not, but I'm just going to tell him. I did tell him that we did win. Because ultimately someone at school in the car on the way home made a meme of me dragging him across the finish line. He tripped over my leg.
I think I saw him on the video. It's like someone literally just like pushed their kid over a finish line. It was
outrageous. I mean, I wasn't that bad, so I wasn't the worst, but I was sort of smugly ran my 3-year-old with him and was like, yeah, well, I'm just not going to be that dad. And then when it came to Harvey, I was like, we've got a chance here. I was like, look at the lineup. I was like, we've got this.
I saw one dad literally go from dragging an arm to lifting his kid to grabbing his kid in his arms,
honestly,
and then just running over the arm. It's hilarious because you watch it and you're gonna go like you just 100% see, like you feel it. Like I would probably be that person as well.
You do.
And in the moment, you know.
Thing is, you get a sniff. You look down the line and you're like, I think I'm going to do this. And then the problem is you then go, well, I've got a child in my hand. But then you're like, you're coming with a journey. And like I said after that, I felt that I was going to do this kind of like Usain Bolt finish at the end, with a pose. And
I was talking to Vic and she was saying one of her friends is a teacher, like they've had like real problems with dads at sports day.
Oh,
and they've had to
absolutely.
do like multiple heats and stuff because there's so many dads want to get involved and it gets like so heated. Yeah, it's just horrendous. But anyway, okay, good.
So it was funny. I feel a bit traumatized after. I suppose I left him crying. I was like, all right, buddy, bye. I was like, oh, it's really bad. not a great dad moment.
No, indeed. So what's been new? What have you come up with this week? What have you found that's been interesting in health?
So I think a change what I was actually going to talk about, because I feel I had some really interesting conversations with patients, and I feel like it really sort of steered my direction. One of the big things is this sort of commonly known that sort of around about sort of 10% of disease is inherited and 90% comes from your environment. And this really sort of was mirrored in lots of conversations I've been having with people. And when you sort of talk to people, they say, oh, my father had hypertension, or my dad had this, and my dad had diabetes. And then when you actually sort of peel away about, well, what was their life like? What was when you say that your dad had diabetes, what did he do? What kind of food do you eat at home? What was kind of your family practices? We talked about ours last few episodes ago, and it kind of just drills down. A lot of the time people are just inheriting bad behaviors.
Yeah, for sure.
And I really kind of feel like I've moved away from the kind of, they would sort of pull out a joke like, oh, my mum, she did love her cake and things like this. And you start then talking, being like, actually, are people just inheriting bad behaviors and bad choices and and that's becoming sort of, endemic in their family, rather than actually handing down a true kind of genetic predisposition for something. Yeah. And that's sort of where I kind of wanted to sort of talk about some topics today, a little bit on diabetes. We brushed really just over Dad, our father, who had type diabetes for about 4 years, and it's going to link in with muscle loss really today. And something that was really interesting was Dad had diagnosed with type 2 diabetes about 5 years ago. He was traditionally put on your classic sort of metformin. The dose was raised up, and then he was also discussed about being put on some cholesterol medication. And it wasn't probably until about 18 months ago of us sort of badgering Dad, saying lose weight and do this, that he ended up deciding to stop doing what he was doing always and just try a different routine. And he started this thing called a miracle morning. And it was where he sort of got up in the morning, did some resistant exercise. He then started doing intermittent fasting. Yep. He then started taking probiotics. He takes brewer's yeast. He takes electrolytes, so more magnesium and more sodium. And he then had his HbA1c. So HbA1c is basically a measure of your red blood cells exposure to glucose over a period of time, and they usually use that as a diagnostic marker to basically see how well your diabetes is going. So his was around about, I think it's about 43 to 48 you're kind of pre-diabetic, and then from 48 upwards you are a diabetic. So obviously his, I think, was he first started was around about 60, I think it was. Now in 9 months he brought his down from 50 something, I think it was, down to 21. Now, I have never met a patient in my life that's ever done that.
Yeah.
Now, Dad came from a background, didn't he, of my grandma was a stay-at-home mum. She cooked everything from scratch, but everything was covered in sugar. And he'd always be rewarded with food, wouldn't he? Especially bad food. And this is where that I think I've listened to a lot of patients this week, and it's sort of really sort of maybe sort of think maybe this is quite an interesting topic to talk about, because you very much see it in like reward behavior with children. And, you know, I'm guilty of it. You know, the kids in the car, you're sort of guilty just to say something or to say, oh, you know, should we go get ice cream and stuff like that? And, you know, they may sort of calm down until the focus is on the ice cream. And I just sort of think sometimes it's actually being mindful about that behavior around food is something that I think is something that's quite interesting, because then it also made me sort of, so I'm going to segue into sort of a different topic, but it makes you kind of think, well, actually is a lot more things going on, more about behaviors and more than actually there being sort of you set into this kind of lifelong well, Dad, for example, he is now classed as a non-diabetic. And I feel like he's done an amazing job, but all he wanted to change is he just changed the routine, changed the behavior. And I think what we sort of very want to talk about is we have people that are in a keto camp, people that are in a carnivore camp, people that are in a paleo, or they're in a this camp, no carb diet, all this type of stuff. They all have an impact in their own way, but something that you do every day is the thing that's going to work. If it's a healthy behavior. And as we were sort of talking before, you know, healthy behaviors are an accumulation or a stacking of things. So today I was going to sort of take one aspect of it, because I think this is something that we kind of don't really talk about too much. And it's a really important part of the diabetic scene. And also I'm going to just sort of briefly segue into menopause, actually. So diabetes. So you have this glucose sink, which is your skeletal muscle. Okay, so this can take up around about 70% of your blood glucose. Okay, now it's on a ticking time bomb. So from the age of 30, we lose around about 1% of our muscle mass every year. So as we age, we're rapidly reducing it down. Okay, now it's important because, you know, they can actually predict or cause mortality. So they can actually see your risk of death from assessing your grip strength. Because strength is such an important part. You know, a lot of when people fall, it's basically inability of eccentric sort of muscle contraction. A lot of people step off curbs, they break hips, they do lots of things. So maintaining muscle mass, not just for preventing falls and osteoporosis and things like this, but in terms of a glucose sink is so important. So one of the things that we focus on with Dad is making sure he really did resistance exercise every day, wasn't it? Making sure that he built up his lean muscle mass. And that's so important because, as I said, we've got this, a diabetic basically is classified is someone that has, normally in our blood, we have 5 grams of sugar in it. Okay. Now a diabetic has 10 grams of sugar in their blood. Okay. But you've got this glucose sink that can contain, so our skeletal muscles that can pull out and store about 500 grams. So if you think if the skeletal muscle is filled with fat deposits, because obviously if you keep eating fat and sugar, you trigger insulin packs it away into the cells, and therefore you start your sort of adipose tissues sort of overflowing, so it puts it into the muscle, therefore your muscle can't uptake glucose out of your body. And you can see where that perpetuation of having high blood sugars and stuff can stay. So by increasing your lean muscle mass is so important to stave off diabetes. And in your liver, obviously, you can take up, I think it's around about 150 grams of glucose. So when people sort of get given medication, and then this is sort of goes back to the sort of behavioral part, I've had patients that have given me a prescription, they've come back in 10 minutes later eating a Mars bar and said, and I've said, what are you doing? And they're sort of saying, well, I've been given medication, so I can I can eat these things, can't I? And I think this is where we don't give the onus to people that the doctor, the pharmacist, the consultant, the osteopath, they can only do so much.
Yeah.
But that interim period is really on you to do something. And if you find it difficult to remember things, then something that becomes a behavioral change is what's going to stick and what's going to actually affect change, because it won't be, you have to think about it. So you'll just bring it with you, you do it with you, and it stays there. So we've got this muscle mass, okay? So muscle can also burn 2 to 3 times sort of more calories than fat can. So it's an important thing that we keep, and it's lost, as we said, around about 1% from the age of 30, okay? Now, there's something also that I've been talking a lot to people about, and that's sort of about in menopause, because women really do suffer with such a huge loss during menopause. And menopause, obviously, a man talking about menopause, so appreciate this, but it's a real problem, because when women start menopause, they don't just lose sort of muscle mass, but they can also lose this really important molecule, which is collagen. And in the first 5 years of menopause, you can lose around about 30% of it. So, just as a brief sort of background for menopause, menopause, people can start having peri-menopause symptoms from the age of 37. And there's around about 34 different symptoms of menopause. And this can go on until, and menopause is actually just one day. It's 1 year after your last period. Right, and then you go into post-menopause, okay? Yep. So in this stage of a woman's life, they can lose all of this muscle mass and collagen. Yep. And then you can see how weight gain, diabetes, autonomic problems, because obviously if you start getting high blood sugar levels, it feeds into the metabolic syndromes, which drive most disease states. When we talk about metabolic problems, we're talking about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, high cholesterol, obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and really the one that sort of sits there and powers all of this is high sugars. Okay, so this is a real massive issue, and I feel like I obviously dispense a lot of HRT medication, and I had a long chat with a lady this week, and it kind of really sort of triggered me into thinking that we're not sort of discussing around the topic as much. Yeah. So for women in menopause, this really important molecule, so it's collagen, but a big part of that is glycine, okay? So this is an amino acid that we actually make in our body. The problem is the body's got this really stupid thing when it comes to glycine, is that when we go through a state of needing more of it, it doesn't really understand it and regulate it enough to actually match the loss. So it doesn't think, right, we're going to be losing 30% more of this, and we need to maintain, say, 15 grams of it a day. It still keeps producing the 3 grams that it needs every day. Now, glycine is important because it's a molecule that powers our defense systems. It also is involved in cholesterol regulation. It's also involved in things like creatine production, energy. And it also, and the interesting things why I've mentioned glycine is that they can take a person's blood and find that if they have low glycine in it, it can be a predictor of diabetes. Right. So you're going through a stage, women are going through a stage where they're losing 30% of their collagen, which contains 1/3 glycine, and they can actually use it as a predictor for diabetes, okay, having the low amounts of it in their body. Now, what we do when you go to the doctor is they will check your estrogen levels, and if they're low, they can put you on HRT, so hormone replacement therapy, usually in the form of estrogen and progesterone. Now, what that does is that basically helps to increase your type 1 collagen, okay, with usually at the start, and then it basically levels out. Now, the interesting part is that you have to be able to, only restores what you've already got.
Right, got you.
So what it basically means is that if you don't have large muscle mass before you go into menopause, if you're not obviously doing things that will cause muscle protein synthesis, such as exercising, consuming more protein during that that period, then you're going to be potentially losing it. So women that don't choose to go on HRT, or women that do choose to go on HRT, everyone needs to be almost in their sort of 20s thinking about investing in making sure they've got good muscle mass. They are, potentially supplementing with collagen. And I think it sort of reverts back into this kind of behavioral change of, well, if people are more aware that they have more of a responsibility to take care of their health moving forward, then people really will, I feel, sort of make these changes now to sort of almost help in the next 10 years when they come into different changes. And we are obviously big proponents of fasting, and we did a little section actually a while ago, and this is the last little bit around sort of women, but we did a little section the other day about when should women fast. So when women are fasting in the luteal stage, so the phase before you come onto a period, you have a reduction in estrogen. And I read an interesting paper that basically says that not much hydration research is done in females. Mm-hmm. So females that are in that stage, that are in competitive situations, when you have a low amount of estrogen, there's a 3 centers in the brain that basically regulate your thirst. Okay, and there's estrogen receptors within that, and they obviously have a reduced response to responding to dehydration. There's an increased risk of you coming hyponatremic, which is low in sodium. So this is interesting. And it's been I've been thinking about this for a while, because I'll be women that are saying, up before they come onto their fast, they can sort of feel a bit foggy headed and a bit thirsty, a bit dehydrated. Should I fast during that period, or should I fast when I first come onto a period? And we recommend that you either go for a very basic fast, which is, the classic, which you should always try and do, not eating 3 hours before you go to bed, and avoid eating 1 hour before you go to bed, after you wake up, sorry. Mm-hmm. But keeping it like that. And then I was sort of thinking, well, actually, isn't this then applicable to menopause? Because people come in with brain fog, they come in feeling very thirsty, they're going through hot sweats, and this sort of mind fog and tiredness, constant fatigue. And then when you look at that, there's sort of signs of dehydration, low salt. And then just to sort of wrap it up, the interesting part about the whole thing is that sodium, so salt, is important to basically power the pump that pumps collagen into your cells. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have enough sodium and vitamin C in your diet, then if you are supplementing, or your body is creating this from the amino acids you're eating, it's still not going to be able to power it into the cells, because you're in a constant state of low salt. Mm-hmm. And it was something that I really sort of found really interesting, because we'll go into this in another topic, but there's lots of evidence about sort of low salt diets can induce prediabetes, and there's around about 14 clinical trials, I think human clinical trials, that show this. And that was something that I sort of thought, it's a really interesting thing, because this all sort of just fits in about preparation for disease states, in a sense, or preparation for going through something. And this is sort of where we feel like if you're going to go out and do a fast, we sort of would say, make sure you take your electrolytes, make sure you're hydrated. Mm-hmm. And it's because it's about understanding what your body's going to be going through. How do you optimize and mitigate for that sort of change? So there's a bit of a mixed match of stuff, but I just felt they all kind of interlinked a little bit.
Yeah, no, definitely. So where's how could people get more collagen or glycine into their lives?
Yeah, good idea. Good point. Sorry. So we said before, you make 3 grams naturally. Mm-hmm. The optimal amount usually is 15 grams plus. So glycine is 1/3 collagen. So if you're having collagen, you basically need to have 3 times the amount of glycine. Okay, so it's a collagen molecule is made up of proline, hydroxyproline, and glycine. So things like boiling up chicken carcasses for chicken bone broth, eating collagenous meat. So 50% of a cow is actually, the weight of it is collagen. So the more collagenous based tissue that you have, or connective tissue, which is what collagen sort of tends to be found in, is really important. And the other thing for like you and I that have quite a high meat diet, you need the higher amount of glycine to offset the methionine load in meat, which is which is basically one of the things that it's around about animal versus a plant thing. But I think that's another conversation.
Yeah. But I guess the other good thing about having bone broth or something is you're also going to get like quite a lot of sodium with
100%
and salt through sodium. We should specify the sodium.
Yeah, you're
in
right.
the form of sodium chloride, which is salt, right?
Yeah.
So but yeah, so you're going to get a good amount of collagen, glycine, plus your sodium chloride. And most importantly, part of that being the sodium part, which is kind of tackling all of those areas. Plus, you're drinking it, which it's aqueous. I mean, it's water based, right? So there's water in there.
Yeah. Yes, of course.
There's salt,
Yeah.
there's
Good
glycine,
point.
there's
Yeah.
collagen. So like, you know, if you're going to go, if you can stomach it and you can go and you can, you know, that's something that you can have. Like, it's probably an all round box ticker, right?
Yeah. I mean, and I use it a lot. You have it
a lot, yeah.
And the other thing as well is actually it's a good question because someone asked me this yesterday about how do you get more into your diet. And the other thing as well is that when you make it, it's like jelly. It's like this sort of wobbly sort of substance, and it's quite nice. You know, if you're making stews or if you're making shepherd's pie, cottage pies, or if you're doing anything like that, you can just put it in and mix it around, and you're just getting this sort of really densely packed sort of sauce of it, and it's fantastic. Yeah.
And then also, if people don't want to, if the idea of jelly or boiling up things is not your cup of tea, which certainly isn't my wife's, you can get it like concentrated. You can go buy like the ones on Amazon. We that's what we get. It kind of comes like it looks like a caramel because it's been kind of the water's been evaporated out of it. So you just take a teaspoon of that, put in some boiling water, and it turns into a
your
drink.
Wife Vic, she was saying to me that she have it with coffee.
No, she has coffee.
Okay, that's not her then. That's I got that from someone that once I've broken my fast, I will have collagen in my coffee.
Right. Yeah. No. So, but the interesting for her is that she hates anything like too meaty, or the idea of bone broth is like really horrible to her. But when she has it in this form, it's like there's a warming kind of, I don't know, there's like a comfort to it. Yeah, exactly. So, okay, cool, nice.
Yeah. So, what about you? What have you sort of come across this week?
Yeah. So for me, I've kind of come across, I think through the nature of my work, but I started to think more on this whole concept of sitting being the new smoking.
Okay.
It's a concept that arose quite a while ago, but it was kind of around, I can't remember if it was popularized by a TED Talk. I know a TED Talk, a guy did it about we're on a kind of event horizon with the kind of trajectory in which sitting is going, workloads, you know, even our downtime, transport, like commuting, things of this nature. Everything is so sedentary, and it's having huge amounts of detrimental impacts on people's lives. So I thought, let me have a little look and see what it is. And oh my God, it's like terrifying when you actually look at it. Like, and don't get me wrong, for all you aficionados out there, I will caveat this, that it is likely very kind of correlative data, I would assume. I can't imagine there's too many studies out there that are causative in the sense of if you sit for long periods, this will happen directly. Outside of the MSK, the musculoskeletal world, right? I think they're probably, even if there isn't, not that I've necessarily delved deep enough into that literature, but I think if you took someone and got them to sit for long enough, you would see objective changes in their posture, you know, and you'd be able to objectify a lot of the musculoskeletal changes going on from a very obvious standpoint. The other things that cropped up within my research was your increased likelihood of cancer, your increased likelihood of anxiety and depression, your increased likelihood of obesity and type 2 diabetes, your increased risk of cardiovascular disease and heart attack. Yeah. They are far, now I'll kind of like touch on these subjects, but I think just to put it out there so people don't start, you know, getting too angry about it, but there is likely some, you know, correlation there.
Yeah, of course.
Data.
Yeah.
And just for those that don't know, what we're talking about there is that what they do is they will survey a group of people, let's say 1,000 people. They'll monitor how long these people sit for, and then they'll test at the end, you know, what are the markers they're looking for. The problem is with correlative data is that you're finding correlation between them, but, you know, you might also find that people who sit for long periods are also people who work in desk jobs, who also have really stressful lives, who maybe don't eat very well because they take their food to work, or they buy food when they're at work. You know, they might hate their job or whatever it is. Do you know what I mean? There's so many associative correlative factors that might increase the likelihood of these other comorbidities happening around sitting, it not just being sitting, if that makes sense. So just want to kind of put a little bit of a, kind of warning out there that I understand that this is the case. But that being said, I still think there is some really striking correlations between sitting and our general health. So the first one being the MSK is the obvious one, but it's my world, so it's kind of the easiest one to start on. So they reckon it's the pressure in your lower back increases by up to 90% when you sit, right? So we think about this epidemic of lower back pain that we see nowadays. 85% of the population will have lower back pain. It costs, I think it's like 12 million people every day suffer with lower back pain. It costs the UK economy 12.3 billion a year, and it's attributed to 119 million days lost of work. So this isn't a small thing. I think it costs the average person who has lower back pain, it costs them on average £953 a year, something like this.
That is ridiculous.
So the point of it is, it sounds trivial going, when you sit it increases the pressure in your lower back by 90%. Well, yeah, but that 90% over time is going to erode joints, it's going to put pressure on discs, it's going to cause muscles to become fibrotic. That's in the lower end. In the top end, we all know that if we have a laptop, we work on our phone, there's a propensity for our heads to go forwards. For every inch your head goes forward, you double the weight of the head. So you're going to double the weight on the disc, double the pressure the muscles have to contract. So it's no wonder you get people coming to see me who are like, I've got this really bad neck pain, and often sometimes lower back pain associatively. But you're like, you can see it. It's like holding a bowling ball over your head and then asking you to move it further in front of you. Like your arms have to work harder the further away it goes. So the same thing's happening with our head. So you can see from the skeletal position that you are going to have more of these problems, right? So posturally, that's a problem. Just on an anecdotal note there, how should we be sitting? We can dive into the minutiae of that in a different video or a different time, but ancestrally, we should be squatting, right? If you look at hunter-gatherer tribes, they will go to the toilet in a squat, they will eat in a squat, they'll cook in a squat. And what this does is it doesn't put any weight in the lower back, it puts the weight into the pelvis. And it causes the body to have a very, very high level of mobility in the ankle joints, the knees, and the hips. And this is so vitally important for so many of the processes that we go through in life. But even if you look at things like the knee over toes guy, I forget what his actual name is. Anyway, he talks about, one of the biggest problems that he sees with knee problems is a lack of ankle dorsiflexion and tibialis anterior, the muscle at the front, the only muscle that really opposes the calf. It's kind of a 14-1 power ratio going on there. If you get in a deep squat for long enough, you'll feel that muscle on fire. So there's all these different things going on with the musculoskeletal system. And I think it was in this TED talk, there was a guy talking about this study where if you have to cross your legs, sit down, and then stand back up, right? Cross your legs, sit down, and in that cross-leg position, stand back up. For every time you put your hand onto and need an aid to get yourself either up or down, it was a decrease in life expectancy, in quality of life and life expectancy by 15%, right? However, what was interesting was that if you improved your mobility and you didn't have to use your aid in one of those, it was a 15% increase in quality of life and longevity the other way. So I think the thing is about mobility is that it's transient, right? And it can change very quickly. It's not like disease states and pathologies that take a while to kind of build up. Well, mobility does that to a degree, but once kind of pathology is got in and rooted, it's far harder to get rid of, whereas mobility is a far easier one when we can do that. Anyway, I digress. So MSK is a really simple one. The next kind of one's talking about obesity, diabetes, things of this nature, one that we've talked about, obviously you've already touched on today. But even there, they were talking about actually what they're now recognizing is the amount that you sit is actually among the most important factors that you consider when it comes to person with diabetes over the amount that someone exercises. And it's for the pure nature that when after 30 minutes of sitting, your metabolism drops by 90%.
Wow. And
so your ability to metabolize glucose and shuttle glucose becomes so much more harder to do. Your metabolism drops. Kind of fatty acids released into the bloodstream. Your body is far less efficient as a system. So a lot of us think about the heart as a pump, but it's actually a really if you looked at the hundreds of thousands of miles of blood vessels that we have, your heart isn't strong enough to pump that volume of blood through all of those blood vessels all at once, right? It relies on a suction and a pump, but even in that nature, it's still not strong enough, which is why we have to move. The reason that arteries and stuff like that beyond a protective nature run very close to and beside muscles is the movement and locomotive action of movement helps to force and pump blood back to the heart. So if we're not moving enough, we're not shuttling things and all that kind of nature. So that's kind of touching on both the cardiovascular element there, as much as the diabetes and obesity risk there. Also, there was something about the enzyme that breaks down fat starts to reduce when we sit for long periods of time. And to your point earlier, which is about having this kind of reservoir where we can dump glucose into if we gain our muscle mass, it's kind of like, if you have a bigger engine, you need more fuel for it, right? And in the same sense, which is quite interesting, is that what people don't realize is that there's the main two areas your body stores sugar is in the muscles and in the liver. But once they're full, that's it. Like we can't put any more in, so that's why sugar gets converted into fat. But what's interesting is that in lipolysis, which is the conversion of fat, there is no limit of storage. It's an unlimited storage, and so that's why you see people go into those, real like morbid obesity, and it's almost mind-boggling to see how a human become that large. It's because the body has no limit to the amount of fat it can store. So if you're not moving, if you're sitting all day, it is going to continually have a larger and larger propensity on the impacts going on there. And then there were some associative factors such as they've found that it's been highly associated long periods of sitting with lung cancer, bowel cancer, uterine cancer, ovarian cancer, and prostate. Now that also may be through motility and the inability for those areas to move, since they are all considered pelvic organs other than the lungs. But again, it's still something that's interesting to start thinking about. And what a lot of people are now doing is talking about, right, we should actually be utilizing standing desks. Okay. And the importance of that is that it allows us to actually get into I think one of the researchers said, when you stand or you walk, you move, you almost use every single nerve in your body, right? Because it has to, because you're moving almost everything. So standing desks are great. You can also get things like anti-fatigue mats you can stand on as well that kind of keep you moving slightly. So standing desks. And then we want to start aiming for like a ratio, if you can, is 50-50 throughout the day. So it's not 4 hours of standing, 4 hours of sitting. It's kind of, every 20 minutes, half an hour, stand up, do your work standing, then sit down, then stand up, then sit down. And you can, if you want to get like really into the minutiae, you could get to like a 70-30 split where you're standing for 70% of the time, sitting for 30% of the time. But, just getting people to be able to raise a desk, stand for a period of time, work that way is going to be so, so beneficial. Actually, that's a really good important point someone was making when I was really looking into this literature, was that going and doing an hour of exercise will not kind of erode the 8 hours of sitting you've done. What they were talking about is that
really interesting, actually.
Sitting is an independent factor of the impact that it has on comorbidities, as much as smoking is an independent factor on its impact on comorbidities. So you can't smoke and then go, right, but I'm going to eat really well, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to get great sleep, I'm going to do all these things. It doesn't matter. Smoking is an independent factor that will negatively impact your health, regardless of how healthy your other outcomes are. Sitting's the same. So it doesn't matter if you decide to exercise for an hour, doesn't matter if you've got your really healthy diet, you sit, doesn't matter if you fast and you sit, doesn't matter if you get great sleep, but you sit for 8 hours a day or even more, it is an independent factor of comorbidity. And so what's really interesting as people start thinking about is it's less about intensity, it's more about consistency, right? So it's not about, right, I've done 8 hours of sitting, I'm going to go do an hour at the gym, but I'm going to really go intense because I've just sat down all day. It's like, no. Like you need to be finding time to get up in the day. Like I often advocate building up to getting 3 10-minute walks in a day. Even if that means starting with 1 10-minute walk and then 2-minute walk, and even if it's one of those things where maybe you can't park your car 10 minutes further away from work, okay, park it in the car park, but turn up 10 minutes early so you can go for a 10-minute walk before you go to work. Do the same when you finish work. Find a 10-minute lunch break or 10 minutes of your lunch break. Instead of sitting down in the canteen, get up and go for a walk. These are little things that we need to start doing more of. And there's other things like as you walk and move, you'll shuttle glucose and do all these other things, particularly like before you eat is a really big one, which will have profound impacts. But there are some of the kind of things, I mean, we could dive into a lot more of the other kind of things that it impacts or the statistics around it. But I think maybe just for the people listening today, it's an interesting snapshot to get people aware of that area. And if you are sat down listening to this, then maybe get up and walk around for the last 10 minutes whilst you listen to what we're doing, because it's so important.
I think again it's so important because I think we tend to offset a bit like guy coming in waiting for his prescription for his diabetic meds with eating a Mars bar. And he thought it's okay because he had the metformin that he was going to be taking. Yeah. And I mean, I'm guilty of it, thinking, I eat this and you'll go and I'm going to be working out or I've got high metabolism, and sometimes you just sort of think I'll offset it somewhere. Yeah. But like you said, I mean, obviously I like that. I've never heard that before about the independent factors, and I think it's just understanding that. And I think again, like you said, and like I said at the start, it's just building those nuances into your day and new routines, isn't it, that just work. That's really fascinating.
I also think with sitting, it's this insidious thing, right? It's a bit like the way alcohol, smoking to some degree, but less nowadays. It's like everyone's doing it, and you do it enough. You do it in small amounts, small enough amounts. You could argue that the impact of it is relatively insidious, right? So you'll get people who drink, right? They become social alcoholics, right? But because everyone drinks, right? There's this some social degree of acceptance around the behavior. Smoking, like as I said, less so around it. But if you said to someone like, "Is drinking good for you?" Like the chances are most people are going to be like, "No," right? And we can argue excess and amount, and the dose makes the poison. But the same thing goes with sitting. Right? It's like most people know that they shouldn't be sitting, but the problem is when you're sat there, you don't really notice anything going on. You're so focused on what you're doing and the task at hand, whether you're eating, whether you're working, whether you're whatever it is, that you're not necessarily aware of these impacts on your body. Yeah, when you get 8 hours in, you're starting to go, "Oh, my neck's starting to ache. I'm getting a bit of a headache. My back's starting to be sore." In the same way, when you start drinking, after that fourth pint, you're starting to go, "Oh, God, I'm really starting to feel this now." But those first, the first 3 weren't too bad. It's that same kind of sense. Is that the problem is with sitting is that it's insidious, but we've kind of had this amnesia around it, because then the next day we sit down and we go back to it, and we almost get this amnesia as we're doing it, because as we're working we kind of go, "Oh, I'm really stiff." You'll get up, move around, sit back, and then you're back into that thing, and gravity takes hold, and gravity is kind of the inextricable force that kills us all in the end. And our kind of job is to kind of continually combat gravity. And if we look at it from that perspective, in as much as that it's this insidious thing that we need to become more conscious of, it will help a lot of people in the long run. And I just think with kids and with the way in which inactivity is being embedded into their lifestyles, I remember when we were growing up, you'd finish school and the first thing you want to do is get out on your bike and cycle around the village with your mates, or go down the park, kick a football around, or whatever it is. Nowadays we can see this shift away.
Well, the average American child, I had read this the other day, sits for 36 hours a week watching television.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's terrifying. That's almost like an adult's full working week for some people.
Exactly. I'm going to paraphrase this, but there was this terrifying statistic on life expectancy with men, the difference between men who sit for an additional 5 hours a day, per week, literal 5 hours per week, versus those that only sat for 3 hours additionally per week. And there was almost it was like 4 years difference in life expectancy or something like this. But so it's like, it's this stuff we're talking about, it's non-trivial, right? In this much that what you're talking about there with, glycine and diabetes and stuff is what I'm talking about here with sitting and the importance of moving more. It's that kind of thing where these things are so overlooked, and we think, "Oh, it's fine. Like that's just, yeah, I sit, but everyone sits, right? And you're like, yeah, okay, but for you, compound that with all the other things that we try to talk about in the podcast and in our social medias and things, which is, maybe you've got poor diet, maybe you don't exercise enough, maybe you have got a really stressful life, marriage, relationship, friendships, whatever it is, and then you sit for 8 hours a day. That's the whole thing, right?
And it is so interesting because this big thing about people taking vitamins and supplements and stuff like that, and the thing is that exercise and movement, and even if you are not exercising to fatigue the muscles, but it does result in a form of flux into the muscles after you finish that movement.
For sure.
And they say that the irony of it is that the body, when it measures certain parameters in the blood, will think, right, okay, so you've got enough of X, Y, and Z, so magnesium in the blood. Therefore, we won't need to uptake as much from the gut that you're absorbing. When you eat something, you think we won't need as much of this because our blood volume is quite high. But within the cells and within the muscle stores and within the bone stores, they're actually depleted. But because you're not uptaking it and the sort of sensors in the blood are saying, actually, we've got enough, we don't need to absorb it. And this is why it's very interesting. So the most optimum time to absorb or to consume any supplement, any vitamin, any food is within 1 hour post-exercise. Because your body, your muscles are obviously, we said, is such a sink for so many things. They're in this sort of like a post-repair phase where they're absorbing so many things. And I think it's just, we've just gone over this so many times, but they are such small things. And it made me think about when I went to Myanmar, and I remember getting off this minibus and seeing everyone, all the men, they wore these kind of bizarre, they're almost like sarongs, and every single one of them squatted.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where my wife and I were sort of sat there like, wow, this is wild. Like, what are they saying like that for? And I remember trying to do it with them for 5 minutes, and I was broken.
I remember sitting in a friend's wedding. She was a Sikh, or is a Sikh, and men sit on one side of the temple, women sit on the other. And I remember being sat there, and you sit there cross-legged on the floor. And I remember sat next to people in like 70s, 80s, mate, and they're like bolt upright, like not even wavering, and I'm there like shifting around, like can't keep still, and because they're, it's that whole thing of it's called SEDS, which is specific adaptation to opposed demand, right? So it's something the body will go through, whatever, you can apply any sort of lens to that in the body, but it will specifically adapt to whatever the imposed demand is. And so for these guys, like it's very specifically adapted their body. So sitting cross-legged on a hard floor for 2-3 hours at temple, like the imposed demand is sitting at a temple cross-legged on the floor, and their body is specifically adapted to that. I'm sat there and I'm adapted to having my legs at right angles and all the rest of it. So I think it's really interesting. And what I would say, just kind of like rounding this podcast up, is the 3 things I heard recently which I thought were really interesting. One thing is that it's not the silver bullet you're looking for. It's lots of gold BBs, right? And I think that like what we're trying to do with this is give lots of, yes, it may seem small and trivial, but they're not. They're got small little golden BBs, opposed to us continually giving you like one silver bullet each time, and it's just a lot more effective. Excuse me. The second one is that this is actually based on business, but I think it relates to health, which is the business quote is that successful people don't move faster, they just get more for every step. And I feel like healthy people don't necessarily move faster, they just get more for every step. They're just like, for the same amount of time you have in a day as that person, they don't have any more time, they're not moving faster in that day, they're just doing more things effectively in that day to make it look like they're getting further and further ahead, but they're not. They're just doing the right things consistently. And the final, which is when I took my cats to the vet today, and I saw this slogan in there. It was great. It just said, invest in your health, don't pay for your disease. Or like, invest in health, don't pay for disease. And that's what's so true. So many of us are not willing to invest in our health, but we're willing to pay for our disease. And hopefully by people listening to this podcast, they'll start investing in their health, and hopefully they won't have to pay for their disease.
Yeah, and hopefully if you really, if you look at the show notes as well, we like to put in a few links in there to our social media. So if you don't follow us on social media, it'd be great if you could go down there and see our little videos. We sort of do lots of different topics, or sort of 1 minute snips. We've also got a 28-day sort of fasting challenge, which is in there. So it's an downloadable ebook, and we send you emails twice a week. And those emails are just sort of summaries of what's in the ebook coming up. And it's 28 days. So each day is a fasting challenge. And we have a daily challenge, which will be things like, be active for 10 minutes in every hour. Or it will be talking about, we talked about sort of sleep, or it'll be talking about different ways to enhance the golden BBs, really, rather than the silver bullets. And it'll be hopefully you'll get some behaviors after that you can obviously use daily, and it becomes something you can do going forward. And it's absolutely fantastic. We have so much good feedback from it, and it's completely free.
Awesome. Let's do it.